Yeah, yeah, I see the way you're connecting it. We can attention. We have a belief that we control attention, that there's an agent that is I that is directing attention, and it's the same as thought. In that thoughts come, they come and they go. Attention moves. And the absorption that I was pointing to, in a sense, is an invitation to drop the belief that we are controlling. And so that's one way to put it. It's also, you could put it as just drop the attempt at controlling. But without the belief that we're controlling, something kind of rests. I've heard it say as in attention moves back and rests at its source. That's one way to describe it. But it's as if something other than the body mind starts to become the foreground. And that can be experienced as attention moving out of thought. And it's also this, that always allows everything. And so a lot of the things that I'm talking about, which are these kind of pointing to directing certain changes or shifts in attention, perception, thought, in a sense, it's describing something that's already the case that then becomes obvious as that's already the case. Because something is already aware of what is prior to thought. And we can point to a practice and an exercise where you can have a sense that there's a shift and you become aware of that's what's prior, but it was already there. And so it's a bit paradoxical in that sense, because we can be talking about attention moving out of thought on its own, or we do it through our own will, or it happens on its own. That sense of movement of attention is actually something recognizing what's already prior to that. And then it's experienced as a shift, as a movement. But over time, and it's the same experience, similar to what you're asking of these two. If in the meditation you allow and become absorbed, then there will be a shift in sensations and perception. But in a sense, it's like, the image of there's a vase and the two faces.
Yeah.
And then you can look at it one way, you look at it the other way, and there's this sense of there's a shift where the experience becomes, let's say the foreground is the vase or the foreground is the faces. But actually there was always both. And so that movement of something going into foreground and background, in a sense, it's also part of the what we could call the illusion, something what is not real. Whereas in the metaphor of that image, what is real is that there's paper with an image that can be interpreted in different ways. But once that real becomes obvious, that it's always the case, then the movement is secondary. The movement of now I'm in absorption, or now the awareness is shifting, that becomes kind of the background. And it could feel like at first it could feel like there's a shift and I've tasted something and now I've lost it, and then I have to do this or that to get that back. And we could also get addicted to those tastes of those shifts. But that addiction will be broken when we realize there is no such shift, because that was always the case. And then we can no longer have the kind of intensity of the release of what you could call like a spiritual experience, or the taste of presence. When everything is known or tasted as, you could say, presence or Buddha nature or emptiness, then in a very real way, everything that seemed to be valuable of spiritual work ends. Because now there's nothing to shift away from or into. And that's the part of this work that we really can't really want. It just happens. What we do want is that initial experience of shifting out of the belief and the sense of being body-mind, because there's a huge relief that comes from that. And there's very real changes in the body-mind, where there could be very pleasant sensations, but the ending of that movement in and out is less something you can want. It just happens, and it'll be known as preferred, but it's not something you can really want. You can't even imagine it. In my case, it actually took months before I was able to conceptualize anything around it. It was just this, like, what the hell happened? It's so strange. And I've been, around teachers and listening to teachers and very close to one of them for 25 years, and I could never have imagined that. So I'm going a little further, but in the conversation around that movement, like what I was talking about, the attention kind of automatically moving out of thought. There's nobody doing that. And there's a stage where that becomes more the let's call it practice. It's the no practice or natural meditation, where you just do nothing and it starts going on its own.
Mm.
And the absorption that I was describing in the meditation that you felt as very powerful, you could start to recognize that that's always the case. What shifts is actually the belief in what I am, from a thing to no belief. Or it could be a more subtle thing. That often is the case. The belief from being body mind to consciousness or a spaciousness, which becomes a more subtle object. But when that shift happens, our perception, our sense of the experience shifts, like looking at the vase and suddenly you see the faces. There's like, oh, there's something else here. But it was always there. You were always looking at it. Yeah, and that the key is to recognize it's a lot closer than it seems. When those shifts happen at first, it feels like, holy cow, that's huge. And it's so kind of hard to get. And then you want to get it again. And then that becomes the thing that creates that contraction and the seeking for the expansion. But you first need to contract in order to experience the expansion again. And so you learn how to contract and expand and contract and expand. And then that becomes the addiction. That becomes the thing that I do, that is I. And that's the thing that's going to get me where I want, which is more of the expansion. But you still need to contract. And it could be subtle. For some people, it's more subtle. For me, it was just really intense. Just contraction, expansion, contraction. Yeah, and the belief that that is a thing, there's something real there, is that the whole structure gets activated and the whole sense of contraction. Because something completely ends when you realize that what you're looking for is always already here. It always was. You can't grasp anymore. You can't. Then there's things that are preferences, and yes, I want more of this or more of that, or there's a movement that's, but it's not coming from that contraction. It's coming from a different place. That absorption is already the case right now, always. And we detect it with shifts in perception, and then you realize the shift in perception is just a consequence of the contraction. And when you no longer have a contraction, you can still start to recognize the absorption. The absorption is always there. Your experience right now is completely without any resistance. Everything that's appearing is appearing without any resistance. Everything is known without any effort.
Mm.
And that which, let's say, that which knows is always knowing. It's a different kind of knowing than the one we use the word. Mm-hmm. And just keep in mind that is always the case. And so you you don't look for the experience of the shift in perception or contraction, and you look for the truth of that in every moment. When you want to, when you remember that and you feel, okay, that was something true, that was more real, I want more of that, then notice the temptation to remember a shift in the experience, a contraction, expansion, or perception, and then look for it in the future, a similar shift. And instead, notice that temptation and notice that, or unless if you haven't seen that that is the case always, bring it as the next step to look at. Look at the possibility that that's the nature of your reality all the time. And then you look for that. Is there actually anything resisting now? And so you're going to immediately come up on the experience of resistance, what you call resistance. And so you look at the resistance and see what it's made of. It's going to be sensations, it's going to be thoughts, it's going to be an experience which is fully known without resistance, effortlessly.
Mm.
And then you're gonna lose all of the objects of contraction and resistance. They will go, and it's like you're trying to grab them. It's like I can't grab onto that resistance because I can see through it. There is no resistance there. And so that which we are grabbing onto starts to kind of dissolve. And it's like trying to grasp water. And the root of that is identification. What's happening is I has no object to identify with. And the absorption is to the the shift to see that the I is always that emptiness, always has been. But it's in the movement of that identification, is experienced as a movement. But once the change in the identification happens, there's that movement ends.